A forgotten abbey, a silent cloister, and a candle that refused to die. When Sister Estelle heard voices not born of prayer, something ancient stirred. The question isn't what she heard, it's whether you're ready to hear it too. It was the sort of morning that seemed neither truly awake nor fully asleep. A pale half-light filtering through the mist, like a secret whispered by stone. The hills of Northumbria rolled in quiet discontent, their winds cold and suspicious, stirring the high grasses like an unseen hand brushing against skin. And perched atop the tallest rise, as if carved from the gray itself, stood St. Elric's retreat, a forgotten relic of faith, cloaked in ivy, watching the valley like a penitent who no longer believed in forgiveness. Miss Marple, now somewhat older than she had been even the last time someone had thought her far too old for danger, stood at the base of the abbey's stone steps. Her gloved hands were folded neatly before her hat pinned against the persistent breeze. A pair of crows stared at her from the lintel above the great wooden door, unmoving. Not a sound escaped from within. She had been summoned, though the letter had pretended it was merely an invitation. Lady Helena Marchwood, patroness of the retreat and its most generous benefactor, had written in a hand both hurried and rehearsed. Something has gone terribly wrong, dear Miss Marple. I dare not write more. Please come at once, and tell no one you are coming. Such phrasing, of course, was a guarantee that Miss Marple would arrive within the week, and she had, beneath a pale sky, across frostbitten moorland, through a village too small for whispers to remain quiet, to find that the abbey did not welcome visitors. Not anymore. The door creaked open of its own accord, as if nudged by a breath from within. No footsteps approached. No voice called her name. Only silence. Miss Marple stepped through the threshold. Inside, the air was thick, not with dust, but memory. A long cloistered hallway stretched before her, its arches bending like the ribs of a slumbering beast. The stone underfoot was polished smooth by centuries of prayerful pacing, and yet here and there, a darker sheen had been scrubbed away, though not well enough. Something unpleasant had soaked into the grout, near the vestry door. A smell lingered, iron and incense. A young novice appeared at last, her face pale, eyes rimmed in red. "You must be Miss Marple," she said in a hushed tone that sounded afraid of the echo. "Lady Marchwood is waiting, in the bell chamber." The bell chamber? Miss Marple raised a brow, but followed. A rather unusual place for tea. The girl didn't laugh. She merely walked on, her shoes whispering against the cold stone. They ascended a narrow staircase that turned in on itself, like a spiral of secrets. The air grew colder. Outside the narrow slit of a window, the fog curled like breath around the tower. At the top, a small door opened onto a room that was all shadow and brass. Great gears stood still in their iron cages. A rope hung untouched. Lady Helena stood by the open window, her gloved hands resting on the edge. The wind took her veil and fluttered it like a warning. She turned only slightly at Miss Marple's approach. "He rang it, you know," she said softly, not in greeting. "At midnight. Just once." Then the rope slipped from his hand, and he fell, all the way down. No scream, just silence. "Who rang it, my dear?" Miss Marple asked, her voice as calm as the winter sky. Lady Helena finally turned fully. Her face was elegant and exhausted. "Brother Edwin," she said. "My nephew. He was the last one to see Father Corwin alive, and now he is dead." Miss Marple's eyes moved slowly to the rope, then to the trapdoor in the floor, still ajar. And beyond it, faintly, the sound of something dripping, one drop at a time. It began with a hush of falling ash, not snow. A mist of charcoal motes drifting down in the fading light, drifting over a high stone roof, as though the heavens themselves had grieved. Ashbourne Priory, its vaulted roofs, blackened by centuries of winter fires, stood solemn upon the heath, its silhouette etched in smudged twilight, its silence profound as a confession left unspoken. Miss Marple arrived at dusk, stepping from her carriage onto slate-gray gravel that crunched beneath her boots like dry bones. A weary lantern-bearer waited by the portcullis, its glass clouded with residue. Beyond the gate, the glassless windows in the cloister's arcades pitched back dark voids. From within, she could hear something, a a low thrum of voices, broken by a stifled sob. She drew a steadying breath. Such a sound did not belong to a house of prayer. Invited under the cover of delicacy, she had come at the request of Reverend Alcott, whose letter had only said, "There is trouble where peace alone should dwell. I beg your discreet inquiry before suspicion takes root." No names, no detail. Such partial pleading only sharpened her curiosity. The gate swung inward by unseen hand. Miss Marple did not start. She had long known that stone walls remembered those who built and broke them alike. Inside, the cloisters formed a square around a courtyard whose center once held a fountain, now dry and choked with detritus. The scent of extinguished candles and cold metal lingered in the air. The corridor's rhythm was broken by carefully spaced patches of darker stone, as though something had been scrubbed away, but not entirely erased. A priest emerged, young and pale, his cassock smudged and collar loose. "Miss Marple?" he asked with uncertain hope. She inclined her head. "I am. You must be Father Giles." His nod trembled. "Yes. It began 3 nights ago. The novices heard footsteps echoing in the south transept. I thought it a draftsman's trick, but then came the whispers. Voices calling my name, softly. At first I thought myself mad." Miss Marple looked over the courtyard, her keen old eyes noting the charred fragments in the fountain stone and the single trail of ash leading to the door of the chapter house. "Show me," she said. He led her toward a low archway, where the ash gathered thickly along the threshold. Beyond, the chapter house seemed nearly intact, benches along stone walls, worn by generations of kneeling clergy. But across the mosaic floor lay a single object, the skeletal remains of a small bird, its bones blackened. Miss Marple knelt, gently brushing ash aside to reveal a cross inscribed upon the floor, an emblem of consecration defaced by an uncanny floral pattern of ash, like black lace unfurling from the remains. "He came here," Father Giles whispered, "late at night. It is said he is the keeper of ashes, but now someone else has taken his place." Miss Marple rose. Her expression was composed, though her mind moved like the wind through a labyrinth. "Tell me," she said, voice soft with intention, "who dwells here, and who should not?" Behind her, the full shadows of Ashbourne Priory closed in, and somewhere within them, secrets stirred. There are bells that call men to prayer. There are bells that mark the passing of kings. And then there are bells that toll not for the living or the dead, but for the truth, which so often dies unspoken. Hollowcross Abbey possessed such bells. Miss Marple heard them first on the wind, 3 mournful notes drifting across the heath, like smoke. Her driver, a stoic man with the air of someone who had grown used to ferrying doctors and undertakers more than guests, muttered something about the hour being wrong. It was not yet vespers, nor matins, yet the bells rang as if time had unraveled itself. Hollowcross stood against the dusk like a wound that had forgotten how to heal. Built into the crag above the coastal cliffs, its towers were black with age, cloaked by ivy that clung like regret. The sea below snarled endlessly at the base of the rocks, its voice swallowed by the wind. The only path to the abbey twisted upward through fog and memory. Miss Marple stepped from the motor-car with the same quiet resolve she had brought into far worse places, drawing rooms where guilt wore silk, and nurseries where secrets crawled louder than toys. She was here by the invitation of the Reverend Prior Thomas, whose letter had been brief and oddly apologetic. "A shadow has fallen upon us, Miss Marple. I dare not speak it aloud, but I feel, as only the old can, that truth must soon be buried unless someone like you intervenes." The bell tolled again, 4 strokes this time. Inside, the abbey seemed preserved in glass. Monks moved silently through its corridors, their habits brushing stone worn by centuries of penitence. No one spoke above a whisper. No one looked one another fully in the eye. They were afraid. Miss Marple was led through a side cloister, past a courtyard where the fountain no longer ran. Beneath it, the ground was dark and cracked, and near it, a candle still burned alone. The prior met her near the relic chamber. His face was papery, the color of milk left too long in the sun. "It was not natural," he said softly, leading her inside. He should not have died not there. Not like that. Who died? Asked Miss Marple, removing her gloves with quiet precision. Brother Eligius, our illuminator. He was found 2 nights ago in the scriptorium, his head laid upon the very page he was illuminating, as though he had fallen asleep. Except he had not, Miss Marple said. No, whispered the prior. He had bitten through his own tongue. A silence followed, thick as old wax. The scriptorium was a gallery of half light and dust. Bookshelves towered in uneven rows. Parchments hung like desiccated skin from their pegs. It smelled of oil, ink, and something faintly coppery. Brother Eligius's desk had not been touched. A manuscript, unfinished, still rested beneath the glow of a shaded lantern. Miss Marple leaned closer. The text was in Latin, but what caught her attention was the border. Intricate vines curled around a dark figure cloaked in black, its face not drawn, but scratched out violently, as if the illuminator himself had recoiled. A trail of dried red ink had trickled down the page. Or was it ink? The prior saw her gaze. The physician called it an aneurysm, a natural collapse. Miss Marple turned slowly. And yet you wrote to me. There was a word, he said hoarsely. A word scrawled on the underside of the desk in blood. She waited. He whispered it. Veritas. Truth. Later that evening, Miss Marple sat in a narrow chamber offered for her stay. The stone walls bled chill despite the small hearth. Outside, the wind howled across the abbey walls. She scribbled notes in a leather-bound journal. There came a knock. A novice entered, thin, no older than 19, with trembling hands. I shouldn't be here, he said. But I heard you see. Brother Eligius wasn't alone that night. Miss Marple looked up gently. Go on. I was bringing fresh water to the refectory. I saw him. Not Brother Eligius, him. A man. A stranger. He was leaving the scriptorium, but he wasn't dressed as one of us. He wore a black cloak, not wool velvet, and he moved like he didn't want to be heard. Could it have been one of the guests? There are no guests this week, the boy said, voice cracking. Except you. Miss Marple rose and poured tea into a cracked cup. Tell me, she said, did Brother Eligius have enemies? The boy looked down. Yes, he said, but not the kind you see in the daylight. The next morning, the abbey was shrouded in mist. The bells did not ring. In the library, Miss Marple met Brother Simeon, the keeper of texts. His back was crooked, his eyes milky with age, but he handled manuscripts as if they were infants. There was a book, he murmured, a psalter unlike any other. Eligius found it buried behind a wall, hidden, bound in red leather, stitched with silver thread. He said it sang when opened. And where is it now? Gone, Simeon whispered. Vanished the night he died. Miss Marple frowned. And this psalter, was it dangerous? Simeon hesitated. It was forbidden. Strange symbols were found on the walls by midday, etched in chalk behind the altar. Miss Marple studied them with a cold gaze. They formed a circle, intersected by a vertical line and a crossbar. A monk approached her quietly. Brother Marius, there is an old story, he murmured, of a sect that believed sacred texts hid a darker truth, that divinity was born of violence, not love. They called themselves the Cloaked Witnesses. They vanished centuries ago. Miss Marple's expression grew grave, but not entirely, it seems. That evening, a second death. Brother Simeon, found beneath the tower stairs, a broken neck and an open drawer in the archives above. In his clenched hand, a torn scrap of red leather, smelling faintly of myrrh and decay. Miss Marple stood at the tower's base, silent. She did not weep, but her eyes betrayed sorrow, for the library, for the truth, for Simeon who had read too deeply. She looked at the stairwell. Someone had descended in haste, but not out of fear, out of triumph. The red psalter was recovered, in the cloisters, hidden behind the statue of St. Cyprian. Miss Marple opened it at midnight by candlelight. The ink was not ink. The illustrations showed not redemption, but ritual, not light, but fire. And upon the final page, the likeness of Brother Eligius, arms outstretched in agony. Below him, the word Veritas, etched in a trembling hand. The prior wept as she revealed it. "It was me," he said, collapsed against the cold stone. "I told him to hide it, to burn it, but he would not. He said truth mattered more than peace. I feared what it would awaken in the others, what it had already awakened in me." Miss Marple's voice was soft. "You killed him to protect their faith?" "No," the prior whispered, "to protect my own." They rang the bells the next morning not for Brother Eligius, nor Brother Simeon. They rang for truth, as bitter as wormwood, as necessary as breath. Miss Marple departed quietly, her coat buttoned to her throat. She did not look back at Hollowcross Abbey. She did not need to. She carried its silence with her. It began at the deepest hour of winter's night, when breath turns to frost, and the world seems paused on its own sharp intake. A single bell tolled within Thornwick Priory, but it had no clear purpose, not an invitation to prayer, nor a summons to death. It rang for something far older, something buried in stone and shadow. Miss Marple first heard it as she stepped from the carriage, her scarf catching the brittle air. Thornwick sat upon a crag overlooking a frozen marsh, its dark silhouette outlined by lantern light, its walls veined with creeping ivy that, like memory, could neither be removed nor fully acknowledged. The marsh's surface gleamed under moonlight, fractured by the silhouettes of skeletal reeds. The bell tolled again, two low, measured notes, as though the abbey itself felt the weight of unspeakable sorrow. She was summoned by hastily penned letters from Father Alden, the newly appointed prior, whose tone betrayed a quiet panic. "Miss Marple, Thornwick is closing in around itself. I fear something has awakened here, something we cannot face alone." She entered the cloisters to find monks in hushed conversation, glancing at one another with fear in their eyes. Their robes whispered against the worn stone floors, and each arch framed dim corners, where doubt crept like a conscious thing. Prior Alden awaited her in the chapter room, its air heavy with incense and suspicion. He was gaunt, his eyes too wide, as if watching for a noise only he could hear. "It was Sister Bernadine," he said, voice trembling. "Found at dawn dead in the infirmary corridor, as if she walked herself to her end." "Infirmary." Miss Marple's tone was gentle but precise. What was she doing there at that hour? He clasped his hands. "She delivered oil for the lamps before Compline. No one else saw her. The nurse found her stretched like a crucifix, eyes vacant, body cold, yet no visible wound." Miss Marple listened. "And the bell?" He shivered. There were 3 tolls at midnight afterward. Not the service bell, the chapel's old one, silent for years. It happened while she lay there. Silence fell, as solemn as a vow. Miss Marple inclined her head. "Show me." They walked through torchlit corridors into the infirmary wing. The lamp oil faintly glowed on stone shelves. The corridor was empty, save for damp patches and traces of footprints, one set leading toward the chapel, as if the dead had walked on the living's path. In the infirmary's antechamber, she saw Sister Bernadine's door ajar, the wax seal cracked. The corridor beyond was half-lit and silent, yet dreadful in its emptiness. Miss Marple pressed a gloved hand to the door. It was unlocked. Inside, the bed was empty, hastily stripped. The lamp lay on its side, and on the floor, a single footprint, smaller than Sister's, deep enough to leave an impression of soul in the thick dust. Miss Marple knelt. "You recognize this?" A young monk, Brother Ephraim, nodded. His voice was a breath. "My slipper, yes, but I left them by the hearth last night." She rose. Something, or someone, wore them in here, but not Sister Bernadine. Behind her, the bell tolled again, soft, uncertain, as if hesitating at the boundary of life and oblivion. Miss Marple closed her eyes. "No, not an accident," she whispered, "and the hour is still incomplete." The letter arrived sealed and waxed the color of dried blood. Miss Marple received it in her drawing-room at St. Mary Mead on a morning washed pale by autumn's chill. The handwriting was severe, slanted, and ecclesiastical. It read, "Most esteemed Miss Marple, I do not write out of superstition, but desperation. A death has occurred here at WRM Abbey, a cloister untouched by time. We buried Brother Anselm yesterday, but I fear his spirit has not left, And more than that, I fear his death was not natural. We need clear eyes and quiet wisdom. You have both. Yours in trembling faith, Abbot Reynard. Wyrm Abbey lay on the western cliffs of Dorset, where chalk bones met the roaring channel. It was a Benedictine retreat said to predate even Norman stones, and for centuries it had guarded its silences with grim devotion. Miss Marple's arrival was greeted with fog, not the soft drifting kind, but a dense, heavy blanket that moved like breath over glass. A novice guided her through ancient corridors whose walls seemed to lean inward. The abbey pulsed with ancient chants and recent unease. She was shown to a guest cell, cold, simple, and smelling faintly of candle wax and mildew. A tapestry of the martyrdom of St. Alban hung opposite her bed, threadbare and blood-tinged. She asked nothing yet. She waited, as the abbey did, for darkness to deepen. At supper, a meal of silence taken under flickering chandeliers, she observed the monks' faces, some drawn with weariness, others tight with hidden storms. Only one met her gaze, a young, intense-faced monk named Brother Felix, whose eyes burned with something unspoken. Later, Abbot Reynard finally spoke. Brother Anselm was found at the base of the bell tower. His skull was shattered. They say he fell, but he had left his bed to pray at matins, and the bells were never rung. Miss Marple gently asked, "And where was the bell ringer?" "Brother Felix. He claims to have overslept." She nodded once. "Oversleeping. In a monastery." She said nothing more that night, but watched the moon disappear behind a sky that refused to weep. The next morning, she visited Brother Anselm's quarters, austere, save for one unsettling detail. The crucifix above his cot had been inverted. Abbot Reynard insisted it was a mistake. Miss Marple, who had once solved a poisoning in a vicar's wine cupboard, knew that monks made few mistakes involving symbols. In a locked drawer, she found a diary, written in Latin, but with 2 entries scratched in English near the end. "They will not listen. The voices come now through the walls. If I die before it is found, tell her to check the bell notes. The truth is between the tolls." She turned to the abbot, who had access to his quarters. He hesitated. "Only 3. Myself, Brother Felix, and Brother Jerome, the infirmarian." Miss Marple whispered, "Then one of them has already lied." The bell tower stood like a sentinel, its steps worn into a spiral by centuries of ascent. Brother Felix, pale and silent, accompanied her and unlocked the rusted door. The chamber was vast and resonant. Great bells hung above, quiet and brooding. She saw dust, disturbed in places, a footprint, a handprint on the rope. She asked gently, "You claim you did not ring the bells that night?" Felix stiffened. "I did not. I dreamt strange things. I awoke well past the hour." "And did no one else hear the bells?" "The novices claimed they heard 3 tolls, but those are dreams, too, or ghosts." Miss Marple touched the bell rope, still slightly frayed. "Or memory." As they descended, she stopped. "Tell me, did Brother Anselm and you quarrel?" He paled. "He thought I read things I should not." "In the library?" His silence was all the answer she needed. She was given access to the abbey's ancient library, a domed chamber whose windows were yellowed with age and grime. Rows upon rows of vellum-bound volumes lined the shelves, watched over by Brother Jerome, the infirmarian and librarian both. He was a gentle man, with eyes dulled by sorrow. "Brother Anselm often read here at night," he told her, "but lately he had become obsessed. There's a book, locked, forbidden. He begged to see it." Miss Marple asked to see the book in question. Jerome hesitated, then produced a key from within his robe. The book was kept in a drawer marked non-licet légère, not to be read. It was bound in darkened calfskin, untitled, its pages stiff with age. Its contents were musical notations, but strange, discordant, unliturgical. And on the last page, Brother Anselm's handwriting. These notes summon more than harmony. They alter memory. She closed the book. The abbey choir had not sung since Anselm's death. But that evening, Miss Marple asked to hear the chant he had last composed. The monks gathered in the ancient chapel, and the walls pulsed with a low, droning harmonics of plainsong. But amid the reverent tones, something jarred, a note too early, a silence where sound should be. She saw eyes widen. A few monks stumbled. One even fell. The chant, the final piece written by Anselm, contained deliberate interruptions, coded gaps. Like Morse. She turned to Brother Jerome. Has anyone attempted to translate the chant by rhythm? He gasped. It would spell letters. Latin, most likely. She said softly, let us try. The chant read, Frow's and Fide, betrayal in faith. Miss Marple returned to the bell tower alone. The ledger, old and brittle, contained records of every toll, including the 3 from the night of Anselm's death. But there, in faded ink between entries, she found faint musical marks, notes inserted where no toll was recorded. A pattern. A cipher. The tolls, paired with chant gaps, spelled a phrase, Jerome oxided me. Jerome killed me. In the chapter house, under candlelight, she gathered them. I believe, she began. Brother Anselm discovered a method of musical cipher, a way to record confessions in plain sight. But the secret disturbed someone. She turned to Jerome. You knew he would reveal the book's dangers, that the chant he left behind would unmask you. Jerome's eyes filled with something like regret. I did not mean to kill him. I only meant to stop him, to silence the chant. But he resisted. He fell. A long silence. Then Reynard spoke. You were trusted. Jerome bowed. And I have betrayed that trust. Miss Marple whispered. Truth can be buried under stone, but it sings, even in silence. Jerome was not arrested. He took a vow of perpetual silence, and was secluded to the abbey's farthest cloister. The chant was locked away. The forbidden book returned to its drawer. But each midnight, the bells tolled once, not by human hand, but by mechanism. To remember. As Miss Marple departed, the fog lifted slightly, revealing the cliffs and sea below. She paused beside the carriage, glancing once more at the distant tower. Evil, she murmured to herself, rarely enters with horns. It walks in with a candle and says it's here to help. The driver asked if she was ready. She smiled, settling into her seat. Yes, she said. I've heard enough music for one lifetime. The carriage creaked through drifting fog as the last of the daylight melted behind the moors. Dusk at St. Gideon's Abbey fell not with darkness, but with stillness, so complete and unwavering it seemed less like the absence of sound and more like the presence of something waiting. Miss Marple, a small and quiet figure wrapped in a wool shawl, stepped down onto gravel that crunched beneath her boots like whispered secrets. She paused, her eyes sweeping the stone walls rising from the mist, walls older than memory, brushed with ivy and silence. She had been summoned discreetly, not with the panic of scandal, but with the hush of unease. My dear Miss Marple, the letter from Reverend Mother Celestina had read. We do not believe in accidents here. Not truly. Sister Imelda's death was attributed to a fall, yet nothing falls alone in a place governed by silence and order. There is something dissonant. You will be discreet as ever. Miss Marple, ever drawn to the quiet places where truth hides under ritual, had accepted. Now a young postulant, no older than 16, and barely breathing above a whisper, led her into the abbey's cloisters. Each step echoed like a drop of water in a deep, stone well. As they passed through the scriptorium hall, the scent of candle wax, vellum, and lavender hung like incense. Voices were rare here. Even prayer was often practiced in silence. Only one thing was louder than the stillness, the sense that something here had shifted, a disruption in the rhythm of sacred time. The room where Sister Imelda had died was left untouched. The Reverend Mother insisted. We are not afraid of death, she had said to Miss Marple, but we do not rush to rearrange its footprint. Imelda had been found at the foot of the bell tower spiral steps, her hands clutching the hem of her robe as though she'd fallen mid-prayer. Her head was cracked upon the stone. No one had seen her fall. Miss Marple examined the steps by lantern light. They were worn smooth by centuries of devotion. The wooden banister was untouched by dust, yet one splinter protruded awkwardly, newly broken. A thread of gray wool hung from it, barely visible in the gloom. Sister Imelda had worn gray wool. At dinner that night, a silent meal broken only by the clink of wooden utensils on clay plates, Miss Marple observed the faces around her. 30 women of varying ages, each absorbed in ritual, a sip, a pause, a nod to the reader, all identical in habit and hair. And yet, one woman's hands trembled, another blinked more than necessary, and across the hall, Sister Benedicta never touched her food. Miss Marple noticed everything, especially what was not there. He was the only man permitted inside the abbey walls. Brother Anselm, the abbey's appointed scholar of sacred texts, a former Oxford don whose mind had slowly bent under the weight of ancient meanings. He met Miss Marple in the herb garden, where lavender grew in regimented beds and rosemary flourished beside stone angels. Sister Imelda often came here, he murmured. She said plants obeyed silence. People didn't. Miss Marple inclined her head. Did she speak much of disobedience? He hesitated. No, but she studied the lost fragments of St. Gideon's writings, notes on sacred music. She believed the chant contained a code. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. A code. A rhythm, rather, Anselm replied. Something older than the abbey, hidden within the intervals. It said the original music of the abbey was banned. It summoned unrest. And did Sister Imelda play this music? She transcribed it. And yes, I believe she played it the night she died. The wind stirred the rosemary. It smelled like memory. That night, Miss Marple asked to be taken to the bell tower. Alone. It was an ancient place, not just in stone but in presence. The walls hummed faintly with the resonance of years. At its peak hung the bell. La Clarissima, forged in 1312, said to have rung once without being touched, the night the original abbess died in her sleep. The bell rope was worn, but unbroken. The window above the steps had been closed tightly, and yet a thin line of soot marked the sill. Candles. Someone had been here. Below, silence stretched like skin across a drum. Miss Marple could feel it, a wound beneath ritual, and someone was straining to keep it closed. In the scriptorium, Miss Marple found Sister Benedicta copying ancient Latin into her ledger. You were close with Sister Imelda, Miss Marple said gently. Benedicta froze, the quill bleeding ink onto the margin. I never envied her, she whispered. Not even when she was chosen to study the music manuscripts. I told myself that. Miss Marple waited. She found something. Not just music. A confession buried in the chant structure. She said it pointed to betrayal. A name. I told her to stop, but she wouldn't. Miss Marple's voice was nearly inaudible. And then, Benedicta looked at her ink-stained fingers. Then the bell rang. But none of us pulled it. Miss Marple asked for a single thing, for the choir to sing the piece Sister Imelda had last transcribed. The nuns, puzzled but obedient, gathered in the chapel. The organ began to hum, a low, droning tone that unsettled the ear, as if a voice were trapped inside. As the chant built, Miss Marple closed her eyes. The melody wound like ivy, delicate, but clinging. And in its final rise, she heard it, a name, hidden in the tonic shift. A cadence that did not belong. Later, she confronted Brother Anselm beneath the arches. She found your name, Miss Marple said simply. He stared at her, and in that silence, confessed. Anselm had once been a professor at Oxford, Imelda his student. He had not joined the abbey by calling, but by necessity. Imelda's research had uncovered not only hidden chant, but hidden sin. He had falsified texts, betrayed confidences, stolen authorship. She would have revealed me, he whispered. But she said she wouldn't. She said silence was mercy. And yet, Miss Marple finished for him. You did not believe her. His face broke. I believed silence was control. I didn't understand. It was sacrifice. He left that night quietly. No trial. No fury. The Reverend Mother insisted that God would handle his judgment. And Sister Imelda's chants were sealed away once more, not in punishment, but in reverence. Miss Marple, as she departed the abbey in the morning light, paused before the bell tower, one last time. She did not ring it. She simply listened, because in places ruled by silence, it is not always sound that tells the truth, but the spaces where sound should be. And it was in that space, between the chant and the bell, between confession and concealment, that the dead, at last, found peace. Miss Marple arrived at Redwell's Priory under a sky as pale and motionless as a held breath. The low baritone of the midnight bell reached her before she stepped onto the gravel courtyard, its vibration shivering through the fog-damp night. It was a toll not for death or prayer, but as if counting time that no longer belonged to the living. The priory rose from the earth like a half-forgotten elegy, stone arches heavy with ivy, buttressed walls bearing centuries of unspoken confessions. A solitary lantern sputtered by the gate, the only warmth in images blurred by mist. Miss Marple's heart, seasoned in the quieter terrors of human nature, stirred at the unaccustomed hush. She had come at the invitation of Reverend Mother Lucinda, whose letter was swift and insistent. There is a presence here that prays not to God, but to silence itself. Sister Helena is dead, or so they say. Do not trust what you are told. Such words were measured. They did not scream danger, but they spoke of rifts in ritual, precisely where danger often hides. A novice, pale-crowned and urgent-eyed, met her at the entrance. She died in the nave. The girl whispered, voice like dry leaves. They found her collapsed at the altar, as if she had fallen asleep, but with her eyes open. Miss Marple catalogued the detail as they walked across the stone tiles of the nave, whose stained-glass windows glowed dimly from within. Candlesticks stood like silent sentinels. The air was thick with incense and something else, an undercurrent of fear. At the altar lay Sister Helena, eyes fixed on a point above where stone vaults met. Her habit was neat, no sign of struggle. A single rosary beads lay fallen across her hands, and upon the marble floor, a faint smear of something dark, just beyond the reach of candlelight. Miss Marple knelt. The smear was not blood. She rose, still studying the ceiling panels. There are no bruises, she said softly. No broken bones, no note left behind. Reverend Mother Lucinda joined her quietly, her face pale. They said it was heart failure, natural causes, she whispered. But I heard her chanting, softly, under her breath, during Compline, something I have never heard a nun say. Miss Marple turned, eyes bright. Chanting? In the nave? Lucinda swallowed. Yes. Not liturgy. Something else. Something in Latin, but different. The midnight toll came again, one final, measured note that died among the arches. Miss Marple closed her eyes, considering the place where faith, fear, and silence had converged. She looked back at Sister Helena. The nun's lips were slightly parted, holding onto a secret mist in the official version of yesterday's passing. In the nave, under the arch, she murmured. This body did not find rest. Tonight, we must find where the chant died. The storm had not ended. It had merely grown tired of shouting. Rain slicked the slate roof of Drowning Cross Abbey, as if trying to wash away its history. When Miss Marple arrived, her coat was soaked through, and yet the cold that awaited her inside the stone sanctuary was not the cold of weather, but of years without change. The abbey, perched on the edge of a coastal cliff in Sussex, was a place older than its walls, a place where rituals outlived their purpose, and silence was not peace, but penance. She was not summoned by alarm, but by unease, a letter written in careful script by the abbess herself. Forgive the breach, Miss Marple. One of our novices is dead, found at vespers with a broken neck and no candle near her hand. She was to be torchbearer. It is said she fell. But I have served God long enough to know when something has been broken, and when something has been severed. Miss Marple stepped into the cloister and immediately noticed the absence of echo. The stones absorbed sound greedily, a place where secrets would not bounce, but disappear. Novice Therese had been 18. Her duties included lighting the candles before evening hymn. She had been found at the base of the vestry stairs, her spine twisted, her unlit candle still pristine beside her. There was no wax, no soot, no match in sight. Miss Marple examined the stairs. No loose stones, no frayed hem. But just above the first landing, a dent in the ancient banister, subtle, splintered, as if someone had braced themselves there, watching. She met with the abbess in the refectory, a severe woman, pale with prayer, who served Miss Marple warm soup without a word. Around them, The sisters dined in silence. Therese was joyful, the abbess said at last, but inquisitive. She asked questions, such as, why one wing of the abbey is always locked, why we are forbidden to sing the Dies Irae in full. Miss Marple sipped her soup. The silence in the room felt deliberate, too deliberate. No sister had entered the West Wing since the 1930s. Bomb damage, they said. Structural risk. But when Miss Marple examined the doors, they were neither warped nor weakened. The iron lock was polished. A gardener, a mute man called Elias, handed her a bunch of keys. She understood his silence as deeply as she read the fear in his eyes. That night, she entered the forbidden corridor. Dust rose like breath in a crypt. Along the hallway, doors stood ajar. Inside, a library of music, handwritten chants, and boxes of incense long disused. One small room had a table with broken candle molds, as though someone had tried to cast wax anew, improperly. She found, at last, a book, Missi Pro Defunctus, handbound, stiff with use. One page was missing. At Lauds, the next morning, Miss Marple attended service. She watched the sisters sing, a haunting, near-perfect harmony. All but one, Sister Agnes. Her mouth moved too slowly, as though her thoughts outran the notes. Later, Miss Marple found her alone in the herbarium, bruising lavender leaves, with trembling hands. Therese found an old score. Agnes confessed. It wasn't for voices, it was for light. Miss Marple waited. She said the candle rhythms were wrong, that the rituals had been shifted. She believed the candle patterns were intentional. She said they marked something beneath us, the way shadows fall when the wind is right. And she found the missing verse, a line the abbess forbade her to sing. Miss Marple now understood. The abbey's mystery was not only musical, it was architectural, spatial, sacred spaces encoded with ritual meaning. And someone had trespassed against the shape of sacred silence. Miss Marple examined the vestry again. This time, she brought Elias. The mute gardener led her to the base of the altar and tapped a stone with the handle of his trowel. Hollow. They pried it loose. Behind it, a tiny corridor, barely wide enough to crawl. And at its end, a space below the chapel. Carved into the stone were candle marks, lines like musical staves. In the center of the floor, an iron brazier still held the crumbled remains of wax. Therese had been here. Someone else had followed. Miss Marple returned to the forbidden library. The missing page was not missing. It had been cut. She found its edge tucked behind a hymn book. The verse was Latin, but coded. A cipher within the chant. Its melody marked shifts in candle placement. Not for illumination, for alignment. The abbey was not just a place of worship. It had once been a compass, aligning shadows, bells, and chant to a fixed point. Something buried. She confronted the abbess. Therese unlocked your ritual, Miss Marple said quietly. She completed what was meant to remain unfinished. The abbess did not deny it. Some knowledge is kept hidden not because it is evil, but because it is too powerful for obedience. She wanted to illuminate what was meant to remain dim. Therese had been followed into the lower chamber. Someone had found her interpreting the old candle marks. It was not the abbess. It was Sister Agnes. I told her to stop. Agnes whispered, weeping. She lit the candles in the wrong rhythm. The bells began to hum. The floor trembled. I thought she had opened something. Miss Marple placed a gentle hand on hers. And so you extinguished a light. She looked at me like I was part of the dark. And maybe I am. The abbey sealed the western wing again. Not out of fear, but humility. The missing verse was sung once more, this time at Therese's requiem. Not in full voice, but in whisper. The abbey did not expel Sister Agnes. She remained, her voice silent, her candle unlit. Penance not in punishment, but in stillness. When Miss Marple departed, she walked past the vestry steps once more. The candle Therese had held was now lit, placed carefully in a niche by the sisters. It would burn for 7 nights, not in grief, but in warning, because some knowledge is not buried to be forgotten. It is buried to be listened to. The train to Norfolk trudged along the gray coastline like a tired hymn. Miss Marple, wrapped in a dove-gray shawl, watched the sea churn against the shore with the calm curiosity of someone who had spent her life listening for what most people ignored. Her summons this time was quiet and peculiar, an unsigned letter folded within a theological journal she had not ordered. Only one sentence was underlined: "The dead do not forget the verses we silence." She arrived at St. Groan's Abbey under a veil of sea fog. The place was scarcely visible from the road, a cluster of ruined cloisters and moss-bitten domes etched against a dying sky. A priest met her at the gate, not with welcome, but with wary apology. "The prior will speak with you, Miss Marple. Though I must warn you, the matter is not open to speculation." "What a curious thing to say," she replied mildly, as if speculation weren't the only way humans come to truth. They passed through an ancient courtyard, where salt-stung roses bloomed beside a scorched patch of stone. "The fire started during Compline," the priest murmured. "In the scriptorium. A monk is dead, but the flames did not behave as fire should." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "And who was the monk?" "Brother Aurelius," he whispered. "Our choirmaster. He died with ash in his mouth, and a prayer he never learned." The abbey smelled of wet parchment and silence. The remaining monks glided through corridors, like ghosts rehearsing devotion. In the charred scriptorium, Miss Marple bent over the remains of a desk that had burned clean through, save one corner, where a scrap of vellum clung. She picked it up with tweezers. The writing was singed, but legible. It was not scripture. It was a notation in red ink, musical, but not meant to be sung. Miss Marple recognized the pattern from an obscure French treatise on tonal architecture, a reverse progression, designed not to call heaven down, but to call memory up. Brother Aurelius had written it backwards. At Vespers, she sat quietly in the chapel, listening. The monks sang perfectly, but something was missing. No minor harmonics, no dissonant resolve, a kind of emptiness. The younger monks glanced at one another mid-hymn, as though straining to hold something in. Later, she found Prior Matthias in his cell, translating a Latin tract. "You were close to Brother Aurelius?" she asked gently. The prior's expression was carved from grief. "He came to us from a destroyed monastery in Flanders, spoke little, sang beautifully, but in recent months he began hearing a music that wasn't ours." "And did he write it down?" Matthias hesitated. "He claimed he was restoring something older, something forbidden." Miss Marple folded her hands. "And did he succeed?" The prior did not answer. By dawn, the sea mist had deepened into something nearly corporeal. Miss Marple walked the perimeter of the chapel and found the old bell tower, sealed with iron rivets. "Lightning damage," the sacristan explained. "But Brother Aurelius used to go up there to meditate." "Interesting," she murmured, "especially for a place the rest of you avoid." Inside the refectory, a young novice approached her timidly. "You should speak with Brother Thorn," he whispered. "He knows about the chant." That evening, under a bleeding dusk, she found Thorn copying out psalms in the cold library. "Why did you help Aurelius?" she asked quietly. He didn't look up. "Because he believed the abbey wasn't built to praise." "No, it was built to contain." She let the silence fill. "He found a scroll in the catacombs, older than the abbey, pre-congregational. It described a litany used to mark burial sites, not for individuals, but for knowledge, to bury the memory of things too dangerous to destroy." Miss Marple blinked. "A right to bind memory in stone?" "Yes. He believed the abbey sits atop one of these sites, and the fire started the night he chanted the litany aloud." Miss Marple asked the sacristan for keys under the pretext of historical interest. That night, she descended into the catacombs, with only a candle and her shawl. The air grew colder with each step, but the silence warmed. It was not the absence of sound. It was its patient memory. She found the chamber beneath the old psaltery. At its center stood a lectern of blackened oak. Behind it, carved into the wall, were patterns, not words, not music, but intervals, like the notches of a buried voice. The floor bore scorch marks, recent and circular, and around the edges, ash had gathered unnaturally, as if swept inward by a breathless wind. Someone else had been here since Aurelius. Someone had finished his chant. Father Evo, the abbey's herbalist, confessed under moonlight. He came to me, Ivo said, the night before the fire, eyes wild. He said he had remembered something that was not his own. What do you mean? He said the chant didn't just reveal knowledge, it transmitted it. He knew things. Dates. Names. A grave beneath the altar. Miss Marple's heart slowed. A grave. He said a prior had been buried there. Not with rites, but as punishment. And then, he began to sing, Ivo whispered, and my ears bled. The next morning, Miss Marple confronted Prior Matthias. There is a grave beneath the altar, she said. He closed his eyes. There is. And the fire wasn't an accident. No. Then why did you summon me? He looked up, eyes hollow. Because the chant didn't die with Aurelius. Someone else has begun to hum it. In sleep. Miss Marple felt her bones grow cold. You. He nodded. And I see things now. Things I should not. The face of the man we buried. He was the founder. And he was mad. Miss Marple returned to the catacomb and dusted the lectern. Beneath layers of soot was a word carved in Aramaic. Shemhazai. A name. One of the fallen. A watcher. She traced it with trembling fingers. The litany had not been written by monks. It had been composed by heretics who believed knowledge had to be chained beneath liturgy. And someone had wanted to resurrect it. Brother Thorn had vanished. She found him at the edge of the sea cliff, whispering in rhythm. I only sang the first verse, he said without turning. You awoke something, she replied. No. I listened. That's all. The song is older than us, and it wants to finish. Thorn was placed under watch, and the lectern sealed again. But Miss Marple knew the abbey had passed a threshold. The litany had been half sung, and its memory now floated freely through the cloisters, like old incense. She urged the prior to keep the bells silent, for bells, she said, could carry not only sound but shape. On her final day, she left a single note in the scriptorium. Not all chants are prayers. Some are locks. As she walked through the sea mist once more, she glanced back. The abbey loomed like a blind sentinel against the horizon. And just for a moment, Miss Marple thought she heard it hum. The letter arrived in a wax-sealed envelope that bore no return address. Miss Marple received it on a wind-slick afternoon as the rain traced silent hieroglyphs upon her sitting-room window. The writing inside was elegant, almost liturgical. It bore neither threat nor plea, only a verse. In cloisters where the prayers have faded, listen for the hymn that walks in silence. There was no signature, but beneath the verse was a name she recognized only from the margins of a forgotten scandal, Monastery of St. Clotilde, Pembrokeshire. She arrived 3 days later, under a sky so overcast it seemed to lower itself over the sea like mourning cloth. The abbey was perched above jagged cliffs, its silhouette warped by centuries of brine and ritual. A monk met her at the iron gate, tall, thin, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. Miss Marple, he said gravely, we feared you wouldn't come. I find fear an unreliable compass, she replied, but curiosity seldom misleads. He introduced himself as Brother Ignatius. The abbot awaits. But I must warn you, the silence here is older than our prayers, and perhaps wiser. Inside the abbey, silence was not absence, it was pressure, the kind that tightens around the skull. Miss Marple was led past cryptic frescoes and into the sacristy, where Abbot Felix sat hunched over a candlelit desk. He looked not so much aged as eroded. There was a fire last month, he began without preamble. Small. No casualties. But in the scriptorium we found something unsettling. He handed her a parchment, stained, brittle, and covered in musical notation unlike any she'd seen. A psalm, she asked. It predates the abbey. And yet, it is not in any Gregorian register, nor in Latin. The chant has no title. But when Brother Liev attempted to play it on the chapel organ, he trailed off. Yes, Miss Marple prompted gently. He collapsed, whispered the abbot, and has not spoken since. Miss Marple requested access to the chapel organ. It stood beneath a rose window darkened by soot, its pipes tarnished, its keys ivory-bitten by age. Brother Liev was there in a wheelchair, his eyes wide but untethered, like someone peering at sound rather than sight. Was he found alone? She asked. Brother Ignatius hesitated. No. Brother Paul was with him, but he's withdrawn. In the nave, Miss Marple found Brother Paul pacing, his footsteps echoing beneath the vaulted ceiling. He was young, with hands stained in ink and wax. You saw what happened. He nodded. He played the chant, the unnamed one. At first it sounded dissonant, then like something being remembered, not performed. And then he screamed. What did he scream? Brother Paul shivered. He said, It's inside the hymn. Miss Marple noticed something curious as she knelt beneath the organ. The stone floor trembled faintly, not constantly, but rhythmically, as if responding to something far below. That night, she wandered the halls and came upon the ancient Psalter room, where centuries of monastic songbooks lined the walls. This she found Brother Lucien, the abbey's archivist, poring over a facsimile of a 9th century hymnology. He looked up, startled. I didn't hear you come in. That seems to be a habit around here, she said dryly. Do you recognize the melody? Lucien shook his head. It's written in a cipher. I think it's a translation of an older liturgy, one not meant for worship but for concealment. Concealment of what? He swallowed. Of knowledge. The next morning, a monk was found dead. Brother Kilian, mute, devout, and beloved, was discovered curled beside the altar, lips blackened, palms scarred as if from heat, though no flame had touched the chapel. A wax cylinder was found in his robes. Miss Marple asked to hear it. The abbey's phonograph, rarely used, wheezed as the needle dropped. The recording was faint, grainy. Then came a sound like stone weeping. It was the chant, but not performed, whispered. A second voice could be heard behind it, not echoing, but preceding it. And then silence. Not an end. A removal. He was trying to record what cannot be remembered. Miss Marple murmured. That evening, she sat in the cloister with Brother Ignatius, who seemed weighed down by more than grief. This abbey was built atop another, he confessed. A priory founded in the 6th century. Its last prior was excommunicated for preaching that music could summon not the divine, but memory itself, not as remembrance, but as resurrection. Miss Marple frowned. And he was buried here, sealed beneath the Psalter room. Miss Marple blinked. Beneath the room where the floor hums. Ignatius nodded slowly. They say he composed a psalm for silence. A hymn so perfectly structured it could bind a soul to stone. Miss Marple visited the bell tower alone at twilight. From there, the abbey's layout became clear. The Psalter room formed the heart of a geometric pattern, 7 chambers aligned like a chord progression. In the tower, she discovered Brother Kilian's chronometer, but it did not count time forward. It reversed, a mechanism ticking backward every 7 minutes. As she watched, the bell chimed, off by a second. Then again, slightly earlier. It's measuring return, she whispered. Not passage. She raced back to the Psalter room. There, Brother Lucien had laid out parchment across the floor, overlaying the original chant with architectural diagrams. It fit perfectly. The chant is not only a song, he said. It's an instruction, a sonic blueprint to awaken something bound beneath this place. Miss Marple realized what had happened. Brother Liev wasn't harmed by the chant, she said. He was connected. The chant opened a conduit. To the prior who was buried, or to the knowledge he tried to bury, Lucien whispered. But knowledge that refuses to stay buried, she finished. That night, another wax cylinder was discovered in the organ chamber. It was blank, no sound. But when played, the abbey shuddered. Every candle dimmed. And Brother Liev, silent for weeks, whispered one word. Requiem. The chant had concluded itself, not in performance, but in presence. Miss Marple stood in the chapel, surrounded by monks in uneasy prayer. She stepped to the lectern, placed the original chant back beneath the altar, and sealed it with wax and salt. This was never meant to be sung, she said. It was meant to be forgotten. On her final morning, Miss Marple departed through the sea mist that once again folded the abbey into obscurity. Brother Ignatius accompanied her to the gate. You've left us changed, he said. No, she replied. The chant did that. I merely listened to its echo. He handed her the sealed parchment. "Take it. The Abbey is not strong enough to forget it again." She accepted it, but spoke with soft certainty. Some songs must remain unsung. And as she walked toward the waiting carriage, she heard, deep in the cliffs behind her, a final note dissolve into silence. Not an end, an unremembering. The letter did not arrive by post. It was discovered, quite impossibly, beneath the wooden wainscot of Miss Marple's cottage wall, dust-cloaked, the parchment curled like an autumn leaf. She found it after hearing a persistent tapping, as if the house itself had grown restless. The handwriting was faded but meticulous, like something remembered by the hand rather than written. No name, no salutation, only a phrase. In hollow cross, the dead do not rest in peace, but in permission. The name struck her faintly. Hollow Cross, an ancestral estate turned monastery near the Welsh border, long since secularized and left to rot between moor and marsh. Her only memory of it came from a wartime sermon about lands that keep secrets not buried, but breathing. Miss Marple departed that very week, her suitcase modest, her expression unreadable. The journey wound through thistle-cloaked hills and winding roads lined with ash trees that leaned as though whispering secrets of their own. When she arrived, Hollow Cross stood shrouded in mist, not ruined, but too intact for comfort, like a corpse too well preserved. The caretaker, Mr. Vale, greeted her not with warmth, but with relief, as though her arrival had postponed something grim. He was gaunt, not from hunger, but from waiting. "The chapel is sealed," he said without prompting, "but the choir can still be heard on windless nights." Miss Marple said nothing, but she noted the chapel spire, crooked like a finger raised in warning. Inside, Hollow Cross was frozen in time, thick with dust, but not decay. Rooms still bore the smell of beeswax, fire soot, and something older, like pressed flowers too long kept. Portraits of abbots and noblemen stared from the walls, their eyes varnished with silent accusation. She was led to a drawing room where an elderly woman sat by the hearth. "Lady Trevelyan," whispered Vale, and then he left. "I wrote the letter," the woman said, her voice sharp as shivered glass, "though I don't recall how it got to you. My dreams, they have begun to leave the room." Lady Trevelyan spoke of dreams that did not belong to her, of him she had never heard sung by voices she could not name. "They press against my sleep," she said, "like something trapped in the walls." Miss Marple requested access to the chapel. "I'm told it's unsafe," Lady Trevelyan said, but her fingers betrayed her words, nervous, plucking at her skirt as if unraveling a thought she feared to complete. The chapel was unlocked the next morning. Dust lay heavy on every surface. The organ, immense and baroque, was bound in iron clasps, padlocked threefold. "Sealed after the last burial," Mr. Vale said. 50 years ago. The last monk died mid-sermon, tongue blackened. They say he was singing something wrong." Miss Marple did not ask what wrong meant. She simply touched the iron and listened, not for sound, but for its echo. In her guest room, she found a clock, ancient, silent, but its hands pointed not to time, but to absence. Midnight had been painted over. Only a blank crescent remained. The next day, she explored the upper library. Among broken spines and forgotten sermons, she found a ledger of funeral rites, crossed-out entries, entire years omitted. Most curious was the name repeated every few pages, Father Elric. No final hymn, body unclaimed. Mr. Vale appeared beside her, without sound. "Father Elric," she inquired. Vale stared at the ledger. He was the last to sing from the Book of Turning. Miss Marple blinked. "The what?" "A hymnal forbidden long before the abbey fell, said to be written not in ink, but in echo." That evening, Miss Marple visited the vestry. There she felt it, air moving where there should be none. She followed the current and found a crack behind a tapestry. Inside, a room forgotten, lined in scorched hymnals, half-sung verses scrawled across the walls. On the floor lay a broken monocle and a name etched in the soot, Father Elric. When she emerged, Lady Trevelyan awaited her in the corridor. "You went into the hollow room," she said, trembling. "That is where they sang the lament." Miss Marple paused. "What is it?" "A hymn," she whispered. But not for mourning. For unmaking. The next morning, a groundskeeper named Jonah was found catatonic near the organ. Lips stitched tight, not by thread, but by will. His eyes streamed tears without blink. Miss Marple sat with him for hours. When his breath finally slowed, he mouthed a single word. Echo. Miss Marple asked Mr. Vale about Jonah. He was born here, he said. Said he'd once heard the organ play itself. They returned to the chapel. She requested the organ be unsealed. Inside its base, hidden beneath warped panels, was a narrow passage. She followed it. At its end, a chamber carved into bedrock. Candles melted to puddles. A single stool. And a hymnal. It bore no title. Only a sigil. 2 crescents, facing away, back to back. The Book of Turning. She took the hymnal and brought it to Lady Trevelyan. Her hands trembled as she opened it. These aren't instructions, she murmured. They're maps. The hymns were not linear, but recursive. Melodies that turned in upon themselves, like thoughts repeating in grief. Miss Marple studied one closely. There was a silence notated, but not a rest. A removal. This hymn, she said, isn't sung to remember the dead. It's sung so they are not remembered at all. That night, the bells of Hollow Cross rang once, at a time no one could place. Not midnight, not dawn, just between. Miss Marple rose and entered the chapel. The organ bench was warm, yet no one had passed her. Upon the altar lay a page torn from the hymnal. No notes, just a verse. In silence we remain. In echo we undo. She knew then. Someone had sung the lament. Lady Trevelyan was missing. Her room untouched. A trail of wax led to the chapel. Miss Marple descended alone into the stone chamber beneath the organ. There she found her, eyes closed, voice a whisper. The lament hovered in the air like smoke without fire. I remember too much, the lady said. This place was meant to forget. Miss Marple knelt beside her. You summoned what was buried. Lady Trevelyan smiled through tears. No, I returned what had risen. And then she was gone. Not dead. Not vanished. Just not. Miss Marple left Hollow Cross at dawn. The fog did not lift. The road curved away into the hills, and behind her, the estate seemed already half erased by mist and time. She carried the hymnal, sealed in salt and cloth. At her cottage, she placed it within a lead-lined box and hid it beneath the floorboards, beside the place where the tapping first began. Later, as rain traced its forgotten patterns upon her window, she whispered, "Some memories are too dangerous to keep and far too dangerous to forget." And somewhere, deep beneath Hollow Cross, a final note faded, not into silence, but into unbeing. A carriage cut through the pale twilight as Miss Marple descended onto the gravel courtyard of St. Aldhelm's Priory. Moss-covered stones of the empty cloisters bore the hush of centuries, untouched by human breath for decades. An unsigned letter, simply sealed with black wax, had summoned her, fearful in tone, yet humble. Come, for the priory does not sleep, and its last hymn remains unsung. The west tower leaned away from its base, as though recoiling from its own shadow. Inside, corridors stretched in gloom. Ancient lantern sconces wept with rust. No living soul greeted her, only the flutter of silk against stone. As she moved deeper, she felt the silence, deliberate, watchful, and waiting. In the scriptorium, she found Brother Simeon. He sat at a vast wooden table littered with parchment and empty quills. His eyes glowed with weariness. "Sister Morella is dead," he whispered without looking up. "Found at dawn, body bent like broken melody at the base of the lectern." Miss Marple asked gently, "Was her candle alight?" He shook his head. Still unlit. Her hand clasped the hymn she was copying. A final verse she labeled in memoriam. But no one knew what part she reached, for each section was crossed out with her own hand. He drew closer. She whispered once before sleep, "It remembered me. I remembered it." Then she fell. Silence closed like a funeral shroud. Brother Simeon led her through arched corridors to the organ chamber. 2 great pipes loomed like silent sentinels. The choir stalls were empty, yet dust lay in intricate patterns, as though disturbed by sound, not feet. She joined me here, Simeon said, to copy a missing hymn from a book of St. Hildegard. The page is gone. Miss Marple placed her hand upon a carved bench. Does it hum? He nodded. When the wind rises through the pipes at night. That evening, a breeze shifted the organ's keys, a low, resonant hum, as if music strained to sing itself into being. Miss Marple listened with her eyes closed. The note quivered with sorrow. And something else, an echo of a word she could not understand. In the Priory's tiny library, she found Sister Beatrice, a woman of severe habits and softer voice. You found a verse? Sister Beatrice asked, looking over a faded margin note. Miss Marple nodded. Copied, then erased. Why? Beatrice closed her eyes. It spoke of unbinding, not salvation. It was a counter hymn, meant to release what is held within these walls. She turned to Miss Marple. Sister Morella believed the hymn could undo a binding made centuries ago. She followed its gradient until the choir no longer sang, nor did she. The shadows seemed to lean closer as they spoke. One candlelit passage led down beneath the choir stalls, concealed behind stone ribs. Miss Marple followed Sister Beatrice through narrow arches into a cathedral of echo, a crypt where ribbed vaults wept with condensation. There, pressed into the stone floor, lay a circle of inscribed runes and 8 chipped candles. The air pulsed with cold resonance, a place designed more for memory than worship. Beatrice trembled. The verse sung here would unseal, not silence. Miss Marple, voice low. Unbind what? The crypt answered with a single, soft echo, an unspoken answer neither of them dared repeat. That night, Miss Marple walked the nave. The Priory's grand clock struck 13 at midnight. Beneath its toll, she heard faint footsteps, soft, deliberate, dancing between pews. She found none, but felt breath where none existed. At dawn she discovered Sister Beatrice collapsed at the lectern, muttering an untranslatable lyric. Her hand grasped a ribbon page, torn where the missing hymn once lay. Miss Marple said gently, What have we undone? Beatrice looked at her with haunted eyes. I finished the verse, and the choir began without sound. Miss Marple insisted on ascending the west tower. By lantern light, she passed ancient gears, a clockwork mechanism rusted with time. The bell weighed heavily above them, ropes frayed by neglect. Brother Simeon accompanied her. When the hidden hymn was found, the bell tolled by itself at sunrise. He pressed open a trapdoor in the floor, revealing the bell rope's linkage to the organ loft via a speaking tube, long forgotten, hardly used, yet still functional. Miss Marple listened at the tube. Distant, hollow, a single syllable, unbind. Back in the scriptorium, Miss Marple gathered the surviving pages, Sister Morella's final margin notes, Beatrice's ribbon fragment, and a ledger entry about a 14th century monk bound in chains for heresy. She realized the missing verse was a reversal, not a prayer, but an unprayer, a song of alchemy saying that in unbinding the old pledge, the binding would shift to someone new. Miss Marple peered at the ledger. It named one who would carry the chorus in absence. That evening, lights shivered in every window. The organ played of its own accord, 3 notes rising, 3 descending, an oral palindrome that echoed through the nave. Miss Marple entered the crypt as candles burned in each rune circle. Sister Beatrice and Brother Simeon knelt, trembling, as the reverse hymn played in their minds. Miss Marple stepped between them. The verse demanded sacrifice of voice. Not blood, but sound. Whoever opens the hymn is bound to silence. Brother Simeon looked at his lips, pale. We released the binding, but at what cost? Beatrice whispered, I cannot speak to him again. Miss Marple departed St. Aldhelm's before dawn. The Priory stood still, its bells silent, its organ resting. No hymnal remained, no signs of Sister Morella's verse. She carried away a single wax page, unmarked but precious. At her cottage, she locked it in a chest lined with salt and prayer. Looking toward the moors, she reflected. Some songs exist to bind souls, and some to unbind them, but whoever listens becomes part of the echo. In the distance, the tower's bell tolled, 13 times, counting not hours, but absence. The evening shadows fell heavily upon the Abbey of St. Cadman, cloaking the surrounding heather hills in dusky velvet. Mist rose from the marsh beyond the cloister wall, like a soul unsure of its bearings. It was near vespers when Miss Jane Marple arrived, her black woolen coat brushed with wind and journey. A discreet invitation had summoned her, no signature, merely a pressed violet, dried and folded into the parchment, and a single sentence in italic Latin. When the bell ceases, listen. The abbey loomed like a hymn half-sung, its belfry crooked, as if bending toward the ground in sorrow. Inside, a hush prevailed, not of peace, but of waiting. Brother Matthew, the prior, met her with a glance more shadowed than the corridor behind him. "We are grateful you have come," he said softly, guiding her to the cloisters. Sister Lenora did not wake from matins. She was found with her hands folded upon the Codex Cadmanensis, though no one recalls her ever studying it. Miss Marple nodded gravely, and the bell. Brother Matthew's gaze dropped. It did not toll that hour, though none touched it. The abbey's routines ran with monastic precision, yet beneath the solemn discipline beat a tremor, like a cracked note beneath the choir's perfect harmony. Miss Marple observed the brothers in silence at supper. They bowed their heads to blessings, yet their eyes betrayed flickers of unease. Her gaze lingered on Brother Thomas, the librarian, a man whose quiet obedience was so absolute it felt deliberate, as though he were concealing not sin but suspicion. That night, she walked alone through the south cloister, her slippers barely audible on the damp stone. And yet she paused suddenly there, in the courtyard. She saw a shadow pass. No footsteps, no wind, no bell, only the echo of motion without sound. She peered through the archway and saw nothing. Yet her heart ticked like a metronome beside a silence that should not be. "There is someone here," she whispered, "but not who you expect." By morning, Miss Marple requested access to the library. Brother Thomas complied, but reluctantly. The codex lay upon a velvet-lined shelf in a locked case, an illuminated manuscript older than the abbey itself. When opened, its pages bore chants in archaic notation, with margins that had once held annotations, now scraped, erased, or overwritten. "Did Sister Lenora study these?" she asked. Brother Thomas hesitated. "Not to my knowledge." Miss Marple bent over the pages. A fine dust had settled along the inner gutter, dust not of parchment, but of ash. She ran a gloved finger across a corner. The ash clung. Beneath it, faint writing, not entirely gone. She squinted. "A chant reversed," she murmured. "A melody transposed into silence." Brother Thomas turned pale. "We believed it a devotional variation." Miss Marple looked at him gravely. "Or an unchant. A music not meant for human voice." Later that day, Miss Marple requested names and whereabouts of every brother and sister within the abbey at the hour the bell failed. The request caused visible discomfort in the abbot, Father Hyacinth, a rigid man whose face resembled carved yew. "Surely," he protested, "a death during prayer is a holy departure, not a mystery." "And yet," Miss Marple said gently, "I've often found sanctity and secrecy dwell uncomfortably close." The list was brought by Brother Caleb, thin, nearly spectral. As he handed her the parchment, he whispered, "There are voices in the chapel after the great silence, but no mouths." Miss Marple met his eyes. "And whose silence do they echo?" He did not answer. Miss Marple remained awake that night. At precisely midnight, she entered the chapel. No bell had tolled, yet the candles along the altar were freshly burned, though no hand had lit them. The air trembled faintly with residual harmony, as though the stones themselves retained the memory of song. She stood in the shadows and listened. From the apse, a soft breath of melody rose. Not human, too distant, too slow, too harmonic. It curved like smoke through the air. And then, unmistakably, she heard it. The reversed chant from the codex, sung by a voice that did not live. She turned toward the organ loft. A figure stood there, cloaked, unmoving. No footsteps, no movement, just the whisper of a verse. O lumen silentiae labura numbers. The final note fell, and the figure vanished. At dawn, Miss Marple explored the oldest wing of the abbey, the crypt beneath the nave, where ancient bells had once hung before the new tower was built. Dust curled like parchment ash in the corners. There, hidden behind a wooden altar, she found a hatch. It opened to a chamber forgotten by all but stone. Inside, 5 bells, each differently sized, each etched with names. But the 6th pedestal stood empty, its name scraped away. Upon the wall, a symbol, matching the margin of the erased chant. A circle of silence. Not just a missing bell, but an expunged tone. A tone too powerful. She turned to find Brother Thomas behind her, pale, trembling. "We tried to forget," he whispered. "We buried it." Miss Marple held up the margin fragment from the codex. "But someone remembered. Sister Lenora. She sought harmony," he murmured. "But the 6th bell, it sings only silence." The community gathered at evensong. Father Hyacinth led with stern dignity, yet his voice wavered during the homily. Midway through the reading, a high, wavering note echoed through the nave. Everyone froze. The 6th bell. Impossible. Absent. Forgotten. Yet it rang. Miss Marple stepped forward. This bell was not forged for worship, it was forged for containment, to seal a hymn that should never be sung. She turned to the abbot. Sister Lenora unlocked it, perhaps unintentionally, but someone else guided her hand. Brother Caleb cried out, "I only showed her the marginalia. I did not know she would sing it." Father Hyacinth's face collapsed into grief. "We were warned. The chant causes stillness. Total, irreversible. No heart survives its harmonic." Miss Marple's voice was soft but ironbound. "Then you used music to kill. The silence to hide." The abbey grew quieter in the weeks that followed, not just in routine, but in essence. The 6th bell was removed, sealed beneath stone, its etchings blurred, its symbol scraped away. A vow was taken never to document its name again. Miss Marple sat in the cloister garden, reading her small Bible. Brother Thomas joined her. "I fear we shall never know how much harm we nearly loosed." She smiled sadly. Sometimes the greatest wisdom lies not in knowing, but in choosing not to pursue what once bound the divine to silence. He looked at her. "You mean the chant?" She shook her head. "I mean the need to hear what should never be heard." She left the abbey beneath a quiet sky. The bell tolled for vespers, as it always had. Yet she paused once by the marsh and listened, not for a bell, but for its absence. And she heard only peace. Though far away, in the stone-vaulted memory of St. Cadman's Abbey, a silence still hummed with the note no one dared sing. A storm brooded low over the moors as Miss Marple arrived at the convent of the Penitent Heart. The clouds pressed down like a sermon unwelcome, and the wind through the cypress trees sounded more like breath, withheld, than any voice of nature. The convent was old, older than most dared to remember, and crouched at the base of a forgotten hill where, some whispered, the dead prayed longer than the living. Her invitation had arrived 3 days prior. No return address, just a faded page from the Book of Psalms with a single line underlined in rust-red ink. "The candle of the wicked shall be put out, and the flame of the just shall shine." Sister Agnes, the prioress, met her in the cloister garden. Her face was the color of rain-worn stone and carried a gravity that made the lilies at her side seem ashamed to bloom. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "It concerns Sister Miriam. She died 2 nights ago. Peacefully, they say, but I am unconvinced." Miss Marple inclined her head. "And what leads you to doubt?" Sister Agnes's lips trembled, because the chapel candle beside her bed, reignited after she passed, it would not go out, not even when I covered it with the glass bell jar. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then perhaps," she said gently, "the flame was not hers." The convent operated with a rhythm too precise for chance. Every moment had its place, and every breath its purpose. Miss Marple noticed it immediately. The deliberate stillness of the sisters, the way they moved as though observed by something more than God. At supper, the silence was not peaceful but penitential. Forks were raised in unison, eyes never met. Only Sister Claire, the novice who served the table, appeared to carry life in her bones. Her youth seemed out of place, like sunlight trapped in a crypt. Later, As Miss Marple passed the corridor to the infirmary, she caught the faint scent of myrrh. From behind the half-open door, she heard Sister Claire whispering, not praying. She saw it. I told her not to look, but she heard the name. When Miss Marple entered, the girl startled. I was praying," she stammered. Miss Marple nodded. Prayers often carry memories, and sometimes warnings. Sister Claire looked away. I think the dead are still listening." The confessional booth stood like a coffin within the stone nave, its curtain perpetually drawn. No sister used it. Sister Agnes had told her. Confession was spoken aloud here, in community. Yet Miss Marple found a curious thing that morning. Footprints in the dust leading to the booth, and none leading out. Inside, the air was warm, as though recently breathed. She found a folded slip of parchment hidden behind the carved oak panel. No signature, no seal. Just 5 Latin words in careful, trembling ink. Ego vidi ignum sine lumen. I saw a fire without light. That night, as the storm returned and rattled the Abbey's iron windows, Miss Marple dreamt of Sister Miriam standing by her bedside, her face calm, her mouth open as though singing, but no sound came, only a flickering glow from within her eyes, a flame that should not burn. The next morning, Miss Marple visited the scriptorium, where the convent's rare manuscripts were copied and preserved. Sister Therese, the archivist, was a woman whose fingers moved like wind across vellum, but her eyes were hollow. Miss Marple inquired about Sister Miriam's duties. She copied hymnals, said Sister Therese. Ancient ones, from before the schism. Did she ever compose? Miss Marple asked. The sister hesitated. Only once. A hymn for the feast of St. Agnes, but it was removed from the canon. Something unsettled the others. Miss Marple was shown the discarded folio. It was incomplete, the final stanza torn, but the music that remained carried an odd dissonance, notes too sharp, rhythms that faltered deliberately, like footsteps on uneven stairs. Did she ever sing it aloud? Miss Marple asked. Sister Therese shook her head. She tried, but her voice, it changed, as though someone else sang through her. The baptismal font was carved from a single stone and stained with age. Yet Miss Marple noticed something strange, heat, a warmth that pulsed beneath the marble like a heartbeat. No fire was nearby. No sun reached the chamber. She asked Sister Agnes about it. The prioress paled. It's older than the convent. Some say it was once a pagan altar. We baptized it with holy water, but the warmth never faded. That night, Miss Marple returned alone. She brought no candle, yet the shadows danced. And there, beside the font, she found it, a burned scrap of Sister Miriam's hymn, edges blackened, but a single line intact. Lux ex tenebris, vox sine corpore. Light from darkness, voice without body. She was not composing, Miss Marple thought. She was transcribing. Mass was held at dawn. The chalice gleamed silver under the candlelight, and the Eucharist proceeded with sacred solemnity. But when Sister Claire stumbled while clearing the altar, the cup tipped, and inside, instead of wine, a fine black powder swirled. Ash! A panic fluttered through the pews. The sisters murmured. Miss Marple stepped forward and touched the residue. Not ash from wood. Something finer. Organic. She confronted Sister Agnes. What did Sister Miriam keep in her cell? Was anything removed after her death? The prioress hesitated. A box of herbs, and a small vial, marked Sanguis Lucis. Blood of light, Miss Marple translated. An alchemical term, Agnes whispered, forbidden in doctrine. But Miriam, she believed some knowledge was hidden in holy song. She called it divine resonance. She said music could open doors. Doors to what? Sister Agnes trembled. To a voice older than Scripture. By lantern light, Miss Marple followed the convent's foundations to an unused cellar. The door was heavy, iron-banded, but not locked. Inside, a circular chamber lined with decayed tapestries and hollowed stone niches. And at the center, a lectern. On it, Miriam's torn hymn, restored. When she read it aloud, the room pulsed. Her ears filled not with sound, but with silence shaped into meaning. And then a voice. Not hers. Not human. I am what they forgot to name, it said. And she remembered. Behind her, a gust extinguished her lantern. The flame would not relight. They found Sister Claire the next morning, unconscious beside the altar, Miriam's hymn clutched in her hand. She awoke muttering in tongues not known to any living liturgy. Sister Agnes wept. Miss Marple closed the hymn's pages and handed it to the prioress. Seal it, in silence, and bury it beneath the baptismal font. Do you believe it was evil? The prioress asked. Miss Marple shook her head. I believe it was knowledge untempered by humility, which is always dangerous. Before her departure, Miss Marple walked once more through the cloister garden. A single candle stood in the chapel window, unmoving in the wind. She paused beside it. Sister Agnes appeared beside her. It has not gone out. Not since Miriam died. Miss Marple watched the flame. Some lights are warnings. Some are invitations. And some are remnants of a voice still trying to speak. She left before dusk, and behind her, the convent bell rang, not for mass, but for memory. A note without echo, a hymn unfinished. A pale moon shivered across the courtyard of St. Violet's Abbey as Miss Jane Marple stepped from the carriage, her shawl drawn close against the autumn chill. The cloisters lay silent, so complete a quiet that she could almost hear the stones exhale. As she entered the cloister, a single candle flickered in a barred window, unattended. A letter was pressed beneath the candle's warm glow. No signature, only 2 words. Listen closely. She was met by Sister Helena, whose face was etched with grief and something deeper than sorrow. It concerns Sister Estelle, she whispered. She collapsed during Compline, said she heard voices, not prayers. Miss Marple noted the candle's flame, steady, as though refusing to die. Perhaps, she said softly, it hears something we cannot. At midnight, Miss Marple stood in the Abbey's nave where the great bell should have tolled. It did not. Instead, a quiet hum filled the air, a whisper of resonance that trembled through the arches. She felt a vibration at her fingertips, like a breath passing through stone. The next morning, the sisters spoke of nothing but that silence. Sister Estelle had vanished, her bed cold, her candle intact. No sign of her footsteps from the cell. No footprints in the cloister. Only the hum remained, faint but persistent. Miss Marple pressed Sister Helena gently. What did she hear? Voices chanting, the sister cried. A litany, but not in Latin. Something older. In the Abbey scriptorium, Miss Marple examined a hidden volume, unnumbered, unlabeled, a prayer book older than the Abbey itself. Its margins were filled with tiny diagrams beside ancient chants. One chant, circled thrice in violet ink, matched Sister Estelle's muttered fragments. She asked the archivist, Brother Simon, about its origin. His face went pale. It was sealed. Forbidden. They said it was too resonant, that it called to something beyond our world. Miss Marple opened to the circled page. Beneath the chant, scribbled faintly in charcoal, a single phrase. Ut silence fiat vox. That silence become voice. She closed the book. Or that voice becomes silence. That night, Miss Marple kept vigil in the crypt beneath the Abbey. She sat among the kneeling benches, candle in hand, listening. She traced the chant in her mind and whispered it once, softly. The walls answered with a low, resonant echo, almost a sigh. In the dimness, she glimpsed Sister Estelle, standing at the far end, motionless, unseeing. Approaching, she found only empty air, and the candle snuffed by an unseen breath. Confession fell upon her. Some knowledge in that chant could bind something too powerful to be named. By dawn, Sister Estelle was found in the garden brushed with dew, muttering fragments of the chant. Her eyes were distant, caught in a memory she could no longer release. Miss Marple soothed her. What do you recall? The sister clutched her hands. It speaks of a vow we never swore, of an oath in the darkness, and it sang itself inside me. Miss Marple's heart tightened. An oath not recorded, yet binding nonetheless. That afternoon, the abbot summoned Miss Marple to his study, its shelves heavy with dust. He confessed that he had once been a scholar, years ago, dangling close to arcane research before renouncing it for humility. He recognized the chant. It had been his curse almost 20 years before. "If knowledge has no guardian," he said, voice trembling, "it becomes a weapon. Sister Estelle awakened what I buried." Miss Marple regarded him kindly. "And what of yourself? Who guards you from what you once called divine?" At vespers, the sisters gathered in the refectory, their voices raised in chant. Miss Marple listened as the ancient hymn unfolded, and then slipped in the forbidden verse. Her ears caught the slightly altered harmony. The abbey trembled at that moment, as though holding its breath. She stepped forward. "Stop!" Silence fell like a curtain. The candle in the corner guttered, and did not extinguish. She turned to the choir. "It is incomplete, and so is the vow. You offered your voices, but not your understanding." In that silence, the candle flickered once and died. In the garden at dawn, Sister Estelle lay asleep beneath the chamomile. Miss Marple knelt beside her, gently closing her hand around a folded parchment. The chant, erased line by line. The sisters joined her silently. The abbot spoke softly. "We will let the chant rest. Unspoken, unread, its flame extinguished." Miss Marple watched the sunrise over the moor and said, "Some songs should never rise again, no matter how beautiful. Silence can be a mercy." As she departed, the abbey bell tolled, not at midnight, but at dawn. A new cadence, measured, peaceful, free of echoes. And in that final note, Miss Marple heard not an end, but a beginning. The beginning of mercy, in silence remembered.